I stepped out of the courthouse with a smile and a spry spring. I looked up at the bright blue sun-filled sky and took a deep breath. It was a good day, and I was glad to be alive. Jauntily walking down the courthouse steps, I reviewed the past 4 months in my mind. 4 months ago, I was in a much worse state of mind and sure that my future would be different than it seemed today. 4 months ago, almost to the day, my delightful wife of 24 years had met me at the door with the words that can turn any man into a slobbering pile of useless human flesh. As I entered the house after a long day at my job as a senior investment counselor, she looked me in the eyes as she spoke. "Jeff, sit down. We are going to talk." Dropping my suit coat onto a chair, I sank into the chair to which my wife, Steph, had pointed. She took a seat in one of the armchairs across from my recliner. She sat up straight, her face calm and almost impassive. "The kids are gone and have lives of their own. You have your career and your other hobbies. I spent 20 years as a housewife and mother. I have decided that it is my turn to have a life and I want a divorce." The words had hit me like a baseball bat on the back of the head. To say I was blindsided was an understatement. There had been no indications that Steph was unhappy or was even considering such an announcement. The best that I could do for a reply was the obvious. "Are you having an affair?" "Not yet, but that is on my agenda. I want to experience life beyond the walls of this house and our boring existence. I intend to see things, do things, and experience things. But we can do that together. I only have a few years until I retire, and then we can do all those things." I watched as she waved her hand dismissively. "First, I would rather not wait on you any longer. I'm not getting any younger, and I still have some of my looks left. I want to experience things while I still have some of my assets intact." I shook my head in disbelief as I spoke. "Do I get any time to rebut any of this? Or at least try to change your mind?" Steph shrugged and spoke with a hint of carefree, nonchalant attitude. "No, I have made up my mind. There is a copy of the divorce filing on your desk. You will be officially served tomorrow morning at your office. I will get my things together and be gone by tomorrow evening when you get home. Might I ask how you intend to support yourself without a job?" "Why, I will use the support the court will order you to pay, and I intend to get a part-time job. I will also have half of our assets, including the house when it sells. When you decide to retire, I will get half of your retirement. I should be able to maintain a comfortable lifestyle." "You seem confident about all this." My lawyer explained it all very simply. "We live in a no-fault divorce state. The courts are quite lenient to wives. He assures me that things will go my way, and you should sign the papers and agree to the divorce. You don't mind if I get my legal advice, do you?" "Of course not. What do you think I am, a shrew and a nag? Get your attorney, look at the paperwork and the division of the assets, and I think you will find that it is a fair offer." With that, I watched as she stood and headed upstairs to the master bedroom. I sat, stunned, before picking up my suit coat and heading to my study. As Steph had said, a packet of papers in a manila folder was sitting on my desk. I looked at the label on the file folder and read it slowly. Fieldton v. Fieldton. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Steph was up and out of the house before I was finished in the shower. I dressed for the office, retrieving the file folder from my desktop, where I paused to make a phone call to the head of the legal department of my firm. I and Dan Springer played golf routinely. I knew Dan couldn't represent me in the divorce. What I needed was a recommendation for a top-notch family law attorney. I soon had what I required and made the second phone call. After a few minutes, I closed the call with an appointment for the next morning with the attorney. As promised, not long after I arrived at the office, my secretary announced Mr. Peter Paulson. I asked her to send him in and waited for the door to open. A tall, rather gaunt man in his late 60s entered the office. I rose to meet him with a hand extended. "Mr. Paulson, I assume you are here to serve me with the divorce papers from my wife." Peter Paulson looked a little surprised. It was rare for someone receiving service to be so cordial and at ease. Yes, sir. Are you Jeffrey Fieldton? One and the same. May I see some identification? Of course. I presented my driver's license and watched as Peter Paulson checked the name and address against the card clipped to the front of the manila envelope he carried. Thank you, sir. Paulson handed the manila envelope to me. I took the envelope and smiled at Peter Paulson. Thank you. Do you need to take a photo or for me to sign something? I have never been served, so I am in unknown territory here. Peter Paulson finally smiled. No, sir. That's all I need. May I also thank you for your professional attitude. I get all kinds of responses, and many people I deal with want to kill the messenger. I chuckled. I'm glad I could make your day a little better. I hope the rest of it goes as well. Peter nodded and quickly exited the office. I tossed the envelope onto the corner of my desk and sat in my large executive chair. My fingers laced behind my head as I leaned back to think. I needed to plan, and I figured the sooner, the better. I stopped at the bottom of the steps leading up to the courthouse and leaned against the railing. I patted the papers in my pocket and smiled again. Things had worked out just as I had planned. I let my mind wander back to when I began to compose my response to the divorce petition I had been served. Sitting at my desk, I quickly began inventorying the assets of my marriage. As I suspected, my wife had already raided our joint savings and checking accounts, moving half of those assets out of the account. I immediately opened a new account at another bank, moving the remaining balances of the checking and savings account to my new bank. Checking my credit card accounts, I found that the balances had all been paid off and the accounts closed. I assumed Steph had opened a new account for herself. I wondered how she managed to convince a credit card company to give her a line of credit with no job, no work history, and no assets. I noted that my Amex card was still open. That wasn't surprising since it was not a joint account, but in my name only. My next steps were to further protect myself. A call to my cell phone provider canceled the service on my wife's cell phone. Another phone call and the insurance on her car was canceled, and I received a tidy little refund on the policy premiums. Next, I called our old bank, speaking with the banker who I had dealt with exclusively, and explained the situation and what I had been doing. The banker, more of a friend than a business associate, was distraught to hear what was happening but understood my actions. I then explained that the SUV that my wife normally drove was titled in her name. The banker understood immediately and assured me that the liability of the car payments would no longer be my responsibility. That only left the house. I had always loved that house. Steph and I had raised our 3 sons there, and it was ripe with memories. I was proud of what I had accomplished in the landscaping and other additions we had made to the property. Taking a deep breath, I called a realtor to put the house on the market. I was sure that Steph didn't have the funds to buy out my portion of the equity, and it would have to be sold to satisfy the demands of the divorce settlement. Steph would have to agree and sign the listing agreement. I instructed the real estate agent to contact Steph about getting her signature. With those tasks accomplished, I laid the manila folder aside and turned my attention to the stock market and the requests from my clients. My mind was clear and focused as I started making phone calls. That evening, I returned home to find that all of my personal belongings had been moved to the guest bedroom downstairs. I wasn't surprised, nor was I disappointed. I had quickly let go of any extreme emotion about the situation, discovering that, at best, I was mildly annoyed and even a little disappointed. Steph was not at home. I found leftovers in the refrigerator for dinner and then retired to my study, shutting and locking the door as I sat down to further my plans. Later, I heard the front door open and close. I assumed that Steph had returned from her excursion. That assumption was proved when I heard footsteps headed upstairs and then the master bedroom door closed. The shower upstairs soon came on. I turned my attention back to my planning. The next morning, I showered, dressed, and found a fresh pot of coffee in the kitchen, but Steph was nowhere to be seen. Her car was still in the driveway, so I assumed she was upstairs, maintaining a comfortable separation. That was fine with me, as I had decided there wasn't much left for us to discuss. She had made her decision and taken her position, leaving me to deal with the outcomes. I took the morning off from work, instructing my secretary to take calls and only disturb me if something extraordinary happened. Stopping at a local breakfast eatery, I treated myself to an enormous breakfast platter complete with strawberry pancakes and plenty of freshly brewed coffee. I timed my exit to put me at the family law practice offices precisely 3 minutes before my scheduled appointment. An hour later, I walked back outside. The meeting had gone about as I anticipated. The attorney, a pleasant and courteous woman about my age, had looked at the divorce papers and explained that what Steph had predicted was true. I was about to get financially raped with the consent and help of the court system. The attorney advised against contesting the divorce. Doing so would only delay the outcome. She predicted that the assets would be reduced at the end of the battle by a significant amount, which would end up in the pockets of our respective lawyers. I had listened, thanked the attorney, and used my Amex card to pay for the consultation as I left. Back at my office, I checked my messages and email. There was nothing of much importance that I couldn't put off. I opened the manila folder, removed the papers, and called my secretary into the office. "Melody, bring your notary stamp and logbook. I have some things that need attention." She entered dutifully and promptly, with her seal and her logbook. I turned the pages of the legal document, initialing where it was marked and finally signing on the last page. Melody, without any comments, put her stamp on the document, signed her name, and then completed the logbook entry. She looked at me as she finished. "Are you okay?" I grinned as I replied, "Never better. Would you package these documents and see that they are delivered to Steph's attorney today? Make sure to get a receipt for the delivery." The next few weeks were remarkably quiet. I was notified that since there was no dispute on the divorce, a quick court date had been set. The divorce would be final after 90 days. Until that time, Steph and I would technically still be married. The court date came. I sat alone at one table in the courtroom. Steph's attorney sat at the other table, but Steph was nowhere to be seen. Everyone stood as the judge entered the courtroom. He gavelled court into session and then immediately looked at me. "Mr. Fieldton, do you have counsel present?" "No, Your Honor. I am not contesting anything about the divorce. I didn't see any reason to incur any more expense than necessary to get this matter settled." The judge nodded and looked at Steph's attorney. "Do you have anything to add to these proceedings?" "No, Your Honor. Mr. Fieldton has agreed without any apparent rancor to the requests his wife has made." The judge looked down at the divorce decree and then back at the courtroom. "I find that all the legal requirements for this divorce have been met, and it is my order that 90 days hence the marriage of Stephanie and Jeffrey Fieldton be dissolved and rendered null and void." The gavel banged and it was over. Everyone left the courtroom. There were no words or contact. I headed to the door of the courthouse and back to work. I assumed that Steph used half of our assets to continue making payments on her SUV and to pay for insurance. At any rate, she was still driving it. I was now comfortably living in a small condo near my office. It was convenient and much less expensive than the house. I missed the house, but I didn't miss the huge mortgage payment or the constant upkeep. A few weeks later, the house sold, and the proceeds of the sale were deposited with Steph's attorney. A day later, I received a cashier's check for my half of the equity after the closing costs, the payoff of the mortgage, and the fees to Steph's attorney. I deposited the check in my new savings account, noting that the balance in that account was now in the upper 6 figures. I stepped away from the railing on the courthouse steps as I turned and headed down the sidewalk toward the parking lot, where my new Corvette sat at the far back corner of the lot. I smiled as I thought about the new car as I walked. My thoughts returned to the happenings of the last 2 weeks. My face became a bit more grim, but I resolved not to let anything darken my mood on this happy day. It was almost 2 months into the 90-day waiting period when my secretary came into my office, her eyes wide. "Sir, there are 2 policemen here to speak to you. Send them in." I rose as the 2 plainclothes officers entered my office. They were solemn and stone-faced as they entered. "Jeff Fieldton." "Yes." "Are you married to Stephanie Fieldton?" "For about another 3 weeks. Then our divorce will be final." "Mr. Fieldton, I am sorry to have to tell you that your wife, estranged wife, was killed in a traffic accident earlier this morning." I looked shocked and sat back down in my chair abruptly. "What happened?" "Mrs. Fieldton was driving on Highway 31 when she was sideswiped by a semi-tractor trailer rig. She lost control of her car and crashed head-on into a bridge abutment. It appears that it was an accident. The driver is in custody pending the accident investigation." I nodded numbly. Tears formed at the corners of my eyes. "You know, she divorced me, but I still loved her. I can't believe that she is gone." "Are you going to be all right, Mr. Fieldton? Is there someone we can call for you?" "No, I will be okay. I'll tell my secretary and then call my children." "When can I get her body?" "The medical examiner will be in touch after the autopsy. Here is my card if you have any other questions." The officers left, and Melody came into the office. Her face was streaked with tears. "Mr. Fieldton, this is awful. I know you were in the midst of a divorce. Are you okay? Can I do anything?" I watched Melody leave my office. I then made the phone calls to my 3 children, who were aghast at the news. They had all sided with their mother in the divorce, blaming me for whatever caused her to leave the marriage. It hadn't surprised me much, since all 3 boys had always been closer to their mother, a product of my being focused on providing a decent living and her decision to be a stay-at-home mom. With that chore out of the way, I called my attorney. She was in court, but her secretary promised to have her call me as soon as she was free. Hanging up the phone, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 2 days later, after talking to my attorney, I was pleased to learn that, because of my wife's tragic death, the divorce petition was moot. Because the 90-day waiting period had not expired, the law saw us as still married, making me Stephanie's heir. That was a pleasant surprise. I asked my attorney to call Steph's attorney and make the arrangements to void the divorce petition and return her property to me. My attorney called me back later that afternoon to report that everything was in the works and all that remained was for our will to go through probate. That was what put me in the courthouse that morning. The judge had reviewed the will that Steph and I had executed several years previously. It only took 30 minutes for the judge to execute the probate, issue the required orders, and call the hearing closed. I had left the courtroom solemnly. Now walking to my new Corvette, I was smiling and enjoying the day. I patted the papers in my suit coat pocket that gave me back all the property that the court had previously awarded to Steph. In addition, there was the $500,000 life insurance policy that was due to pay off in the next 2 days. The trucking company had also made a settlement offer that would further increase my assets by another $2 million. I was eagerly awaiting the extended trip to the Greek islands with Melody that would start the following week, the same time my retirement would begin. With a small skip and a twinkle in my eye, I stepped off the curb to cross the parking lot to my new Corvette, never seeing the trash truck that slammed into me as my foot hit the asphalt of the parking lot. Karma is a bitch.